Hello and welcome to our channel. In the annals of history, few names evoke as much horror and fascination as Adolf Hitler. He was a man who rose from obscurity to lead a nation, only to plunge the world into the most devastating conflict it had ever seen. His legacy is one of destruction, genocide and war, a stark reminder of the darkest depths of human nature. But how did this happen? How did one man with a background as unremarkable as any other come to wield such power and influence? How did Adolf Hitler rise to become the Führer of Germany, leading millions into a war that would leave the world forever scarred? This is the story of Adolf Hitler, a story of ambition, manipulation, and the exploitation of a nation's despair. It is a story that begins in the ashes of World War I, with a broken Germany searching for hope, and ends in the ruins of a world nearly destroyed by his ambitions. To understand Hitler, we must delve into the era that shaped him, the ideas that fueled him, and the events that allowed him to seize control. Only by tracing his journey from obscurity to infamy can we grasp the full scope of the catastrophe he unleashed upon the world. Join us as we explore the life of Adolf Hitler, a life that forever altered the course of history. This is not just the story of a man, but of a world ensnared by his vision of domination and hatred. Long before the world would come to know the name Adolf Hitler, he was just a boy born in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn on April 20th, 1889. His early life gave little indication of the man he would become, a man who would later bring the world to its knees. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler and Clara Polzel. Hitler's siblings included Gustav, Ida, Otto, Edmund and Paula. Unfortunately, 3 of his siblings, Gustav, Ida and Otto, died in infancy due to various illnesses, which deeply affected his mother, Clara. This loss likely contributed to the close bond Hitler shared with his mother, whom he adored. Hitler's relationship with his father, Alois, was more complicated. Alois was a strict and authoritarian figure, often clashing with young Adolf over his future career plans. Alois had high expectations for his son, hoping he would follow in his footsteps as a civil servant. But Adolf was a dreamer, drawn not to the rigid structure of bureaucracy, but to the world of art. This desire to become an artist clashed with his father's ambitions, leading to a strained and often turbulent relationship. As a student, Hitler was unremarkable. He showed little interest in his studies, except for subjects that fueled his growing sense of German nationalism. He was a solitary boy, often lost in his own thoughts, harboring dreams of artistic greatness. But these dreams would soon be crushed. After his father's death in 1903 and his mother's death in 1907, Hitler moved to Vienna, where he struggled to make a living as an artist. Hitler moved to Vienna, where he sought admission to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. Confident in his abilities, he was devastated when he was rejected, not once but twice. The Academy's assessment was clear: Adolf Hitler lacked the talent required to be a painter. His dreams shattered, Hitler spent the next few years in Vienna, living in poverty and drifting aimlessly. It was during this period that his views began to harden. Alone and embittered, he absorbed the prevailing currents of anti-Semitism, nationalism and social Darwinism that were rife in the city. Vienna, the cultural heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, became the crucible in which his extremist ideas began to take shape. These years in Vienna were formative for Hitler, not as an artist, but as a man consumed by bitterness and anger. The rejection he faced, both personal and professional, would fuel a deep-seated resentment that would later be directed towards those he blamed for his failures, most notably the Jewish community. This was the seedbed of hatred that would grow into a catastrophic ideology. By 1913, Hitler had left Vienna for Munich. Still a failed artist, but now a man with a growing obsession, a desire to see Germany rise and to find a place for himself within that destiny. Little did the world know, the stage was being set for one of history's darkest chapters. As the world hurtled toward war, Adolf Hitler was about to find the purpose that had so long eluded him, a purpose that would ultimately lead to unimaginable destruction. In 1913, Adolf Hitler arrived in Munich, a city alive with the energy of a nation on the brink of transformation. Here, in this Bavarian capital, he sought refuge from the disappointments of Vienna. But it was not art or architecture that would define his future, it was war. When World War I broke out in 1914, Hitler eagerly enlisted in the German army. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose and belonging. Serving as a dispatch runner on the Western Front, he was decorated for bravery, receiving the Iron Cross, First Class, a rare honor for a soldier of his rank. But the war that gave Hitler his sense of identity would also plant the seeds of his radicalization. The war ended in 1918 with Germany's defeat, a bitter blow that left the nation in turmoil. For Hitler, the loss was personal. The end of the war shattered his hopes and dreams of a resurgent Germany. As he recuperated in a hospital after being temporarily blinded in a gas attack, news of the armistice reached him. He would later describe this moment as the birth of his political awakening, a realization that Germany had been stabbed in the back by traitors at home, a belief that would fuel his hatred for Jews, communists, and anyone he deemed responsible for the nation's humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed severe penalties on Germany. The terms were seen by many Germans as a national humiliation, fueling widespread anger and economic hardship. Hitler, like many others, was outraged. He became increasingly involved in politics, channeling his fury into a new cause, one that would soon catapult him into the national spotlight. In 1919, Hitler joined a small political group in Munich, known as the German Workers' Party. It was here, in the back rooms of beer halls, that Hitler found his voice as a propagandist and orator. His speeches, filled with fervent nationalism and virulent anti-Semitism, resonated with a populace desperate for answers in a time of chaos. The party, soon renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, began to attract a following, drawn to Hitler's fiery rhetoric and promises of restoring Germany's lost glory. Emboldened by his growing influence, Hitler made his first bid for power in 1923 with the Beer Hall Putsch, an attempted coup to overthrow the Weimar government. The Beer Hall Putsch was an attempted coup by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party on November 8-9, 1923 in Munich, Germany. The putsch aimed to overthrow the Weimar Republic and establish a right-wing government in its place. By 1923, Germany was in a state of crisis due to the hyperinflation of the German mark, economic hardship, and widespread dissatisfaction with the Weimar Republic. Many Germans were disillusioned with the government, and various extremist groups, including the Nazi Party, gained popularity by promising to restore national pride and stability. The Beer Hall Putsch began on the evening of November 8, 1923, when Hitler and some 600 members of the SA, Sturmabteilung or Storm Detachment, stormed the Bürgerbräukeller, a large beer hall in Munich, where Gustav von Kahr, the State Commissioner of Bavaria, was giving a speech. Hitler fired a pistol into the ceiling and declared that a national revolution had begun. He then attempted to persuade Kahr and other officials present to join the coup and support his overthrow of the Weimar government. Hitler's plan relied on gaining the support of the Bavarian leaders and then marching on Berlin to seize power. However, despite initial promises, Kahr and his colleagues withdrew their support after leaving the beer hall. On November 9th, Hitler and his followers, including prominent Nazi leaders like Hermann Göring and Ernst Röhm, decided to proceed with the coup. They marched through Munich in an attempt to seize key government buildings. However, they were met by the Munich police and the Reichswehr, German army. A brief but intense firefight ensued, resulting in the deaths of 16 Nazis and 4 police officers. The putsch failed miserably, and Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. But instead of marking the end of his political career, this setback became a turning point. During his time in Landsberg prison, Hitler began to articulate his vision for Germany's future, writing Mein Kampf, a manifesto that outlined his ideas on race, living space, and the destiny of the German people. Hitler emerged from prison in 1924 with a new strategy. He realized that to seize power, he would need to do so through legal means. The Nazi Party, once on the fringes, began to grow in strength, capitalizing on the economic woes and political instability that plagued the Weimar Republic. Through a combination of propaganda, political alliances, and sheer force of will, Hitler slowly but surely moved from the margins to the mainstream. By 1930, the Nazi Party had become a formidable force in German politics. Hitler's promises to restore Germany's pride, to rebuild its economy, and to purge it of those he deemed enemies of the state, struck a chord with a nation in despair. As the Great Depression deepened, Hitler's appeal grew stronger, paving the way for his eventual ascent to the highest office in the land. What began as a calculated move by conservative elites to control the Nazi movement quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Hitler, once dismissed as a fringe fanatic, had now gained the power to reshape Germany and the world according to his vision. The stage was set for the most destructive regime in history. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, a moment that marked the beginning of a profound transformation for the nation. But his appointment was just the first step. To realize his vision of a totalitarian state, Hitler needed to consolidate his power, dismantling the democratic structures of the Weimar Republic and replacing them with the machinery of the Third Reich. Hitler's rise to power was swift, but it was the events that followed his appointment that solidified his control. The Nazis wasted no time in exploiting their newfound authority. Just weeks after taking office, a pivotal event provided the pretext Hitler needed to begin his assault on Germany's fragile democracy. The Reichstag fire was a turning point. Although the true cause of the fire remains a subject of debate, Hitler and the Nazis quickly blamed communists, using the incident as a justification for the Reichstag fire decree. This decree, signed by President Hindenburg, suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political opponents without due process. It was the first step in dismantling the democratic institutions that had governed Germany for over a decade. With the opposition weakened and civil liberties curtailed, Hitler moved swiftly to consolidate his grip on power. The next crucial step came with the passing of the Enabling Act on March 23, 1933. This act gave Hitler the power to enact laws without the involvement of the Reichstag or the president, effectively giving him dictatorial powers. Under immense pressure and facing threats from the Nazi paramilitary forces, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, effectively signing away its own power. With this new authority, Hitler began the process of Gleichschaltung, coordination, in which every aspect of German society was brought under Nazi control. Political parties, trade unions and civil organizations were either dissolved or absorbed into the Nazi apparatus. Germany was rapidly becoming a one-party state. By the summer of 1933, Hitler's power was nearly absolute, but there was one more obstacle to overcome: internal dissent within his own party. The Sturmabteilung, or SA, led by Ernst Röhm, had played a crucial role in Hitler's rise, but their growing power and Röhm's ambitions posed a threat to Hitler's control. Röhm envisioned the SA as a revolutionary force, one that could replace the regular army and take on a more dominant role in the new regime. To eliminate this threat, Hitler orchestrated a purge that would come to be known as the Night of the Long Knives. On the night of June 30th, 1934, Hitler, along with the SS, launched a series of coordinated attacks against the SA leadership. Ernst Röhm and many others were arrested and executed without trial. The purge extended beyond the SA, targeting other political rivals and dissenters within the Nazi Party. The Night of the Long Knives solidified Hitler's control over the Nazi Party and secured the loyalty of the German military, who were relieved to see the SA's power curtailed. In return for their support, Hitler assured the army's place as the primary military force in Germany, paving the way for his ultimate goal: rearmament and territorial expansion. With the SA subdued and the military firmly under his control, Hitler turned his attention to consolidating his power at the very top. On August 2, 1934, President Paul von Hindenburg died, and Hitler moved swiftly to combine the offices of President and Chancellor, declaring himself Führer and Reich Chancellor of Germany. The last vestiges of the Weimar Republic were gone, replaced by a dictatorship that would soon plunge the world into darkness. Germany was now under the complete control of Adolf Hitler, who had transformed it into a totalitarian state, Every institution, every aspect of life was brought in line with Nazi ideology. The Gleichschaltung was complete, and Hitler's vision of a new Germany, a Germany based on racial purity, militarism, and absolute loyalty to the Führer, was now a terrifying reality. As Hitler tightened his grip on Germany, he set his sights on a larger goal, the expansion of the Third Reich across Europe. The groundwork for war had been laid, and the world would soon face the consequences of his unbridled ambition. With absolute power now in his hands, Adolf Hitler set out to mold Germany into his vision of a totalitarian state. At the heart of the Third Reich was an ideology rooted in a dangerous blend of nationalism, racism, and militarism. Hitler's beliefs, once dismissed as the ravings of a fringe politician, now became the guiding principles of a regime that would plunge the world into unprecedented darkness. Nazi ideology was built on the foundation of racial purity, the belief that the Aryan race was superior to all others. According to Hitler, history was a struggle between races, and the survival of the German people depended on the eradication of those he deemed inferior, especially the Jews. This virulent anti-Semitism was not just a personal obsession, but a central pillar of the Nazi state. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws institutionalized the racism that had long been a part of Nazi rhetoric. These laws defined who was considered a Jew and stripped Jewish citizens of their rights. The laws were just the beginning of a systematic campaign of persecution that would escalate into the most horrific chapter of the Holocaust. To ensure the future of the Reich, Hitler and the Nazis placed great emphasis on indoctrinating the youth. The Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls became the primary tools for shaping the next generation, instilling in them loyalty to the Führer, a sense of racial superiority, and a readiness to sacrifice everything for the nation. Education was transformed into a tool of propaganda, where children learned to hate those deemed enemies of the state and to prepare for the wars to come. Nazi ideology permeated every aspect of German life. Through relentless propaganda, Hitler and his regime sought to create a society in which loyalty to the Führer and the state was absolute. This total control extended to every facet of life: education, the economy, and even the family. The regime sought to eliminate any form of dissent, and those who did not conform to the Nazi ideal faced persecution, imprisonment, or worse. The SS, led by Heinrich Himmler, became the most feared instrument of Nazi control. Originally Hitler's personal bodyguard, the SS expanded into a powerful paramilitary organization tasked with enforcing Nazi ideology through brutal means. Alongside the Gestapo, the secret police, they eliminated political opponents, enforced racial laws, and operated the concentration camps where millions would meet their deaths. As the Nazi state tightened its grip, the persecution of Jews and other so-called undesirables intensified. Hitler's vision of a racially pure Germany required the removal of those he believed polluted the nation. The Jews, in particular, became the primary targets of a campaign that would escalate from discrimination to genocide. Hitler's ideology also demanded the expansion of German territory, what he called Lebensraum, or living space for the Aryan race. His early moves in foreign policy were bold and calculated. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss, and soon after, Hitler's demands for the Sudetenland led to the Munich Agreement, where Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, acquiesced to his territorial ambitions. But appeasement would only embolden Hitler, setting the stage for the larger conquests he envisioned. While the world hoped that Hitler's appetite for expansion would be sated, the reality was far different. Each victory only fueled his ambitions. Hitler's Germany was now a formidable force, poised to challenge the world order and impose its ideology on all of Europe. By 1939, Hitler's Third Reich was not only a totalitarian state, but a war machine, ready to unleash its full might on an unsuspecting world. The ideology that had taken root in Germany was now on the verge of being exported across Europe, bringing with it the horrors of war and the shadow of genocide. By 1939, Adolf Hitler had transformed Germany into a formidable military power, driven by an ideology of racial superiority and territorial expansion. Each diplomatic success, each territorial gain, emboldened him further. The world was on the brink of a conflict unlike any it had ever seen, and at the heart of this looming catastrophe was Hitler's unrelenting ambition to reshape Europe in the image of the Third Reich. Hitler's first major move was the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria in March 1938. This bloodless conquest, welcomed by many Austrians, was the first step in Hitler's grand plan to unite all German-speaking people under one Reich. The international community, desperate to avoid another war, largely stood by. The Munich Agreement later that year, in which Britain and France conceded the Sudetenland to Germany, only further convinced Hitler that the Western powers lacked the will to stop him. Despite assurances that his territorial ambitions were satisfied, Hitler's appetite for conquest was far from quenched. In March 1939, he broke his promises by occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia. This brazen move showed the world that appeasement had failed. But even as tensions escalated, the most shocking diplomatic maneuver was yet to come. In August 1939, Hitler secured a non-aggression pact with his ideological enemy, the Soviet Union. The Nazi-Soviet Pact, as it came to be known, ensured that Germany would not face a war on two fronts, and secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence between the two totalitarian regimes. With the pact in place, Hitler was ready to launch his most audacious move yet. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was unleashed with devastating effect. Utilizing speed, surprise, and overwhelming force, the German military quickly overran Polish defenses. Within weeks, Warsaw fell, and Poland was partitioned between Germany and the Soviet Union, as agreed in their secret pact. The invasion of Poland was the spark that ignited World War II. Britain and France, bound by their treaty obligations to Poland, declared war on Germany. But despite their declarations, neither was fully prepared for the ferocity of the conflict that was now unfolding. The world was plunged into war, but it was a war on Hitler's terms, a war he had meticulously planned for, with the aim of not just conquering Europe, but reshaping it entirely according to his twisted vision. The early months of the war saw Germany achieve a series of stunning victories. In April 1940, Hitler launched simultaneous invasions of Denmark and Norway, securing critical strategic positions. Then, in May 1940, the Wehrmacht unleashed its full might on Western Europe, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line through the Ardennes forest. France, thought to be one of the world's strongest military powers, crumbled in just 6 weeks. Paris fell, and the swastika flew over the Eiffel Tower, symbolizing the collapse of yet another European democracy. While Germany celebrated its victories, the British Expeditionary Force, along with thousands of French and Belgian troops, found themselves trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk. In what would become known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, over 300,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated across the English Channel, narrowly escaping capture. Hitler had conquered much of Western Europe, but Britain remained defiant, standing alone against the Nazi onslaught. Undeterred by Britain's resistance, Hitler ordered a massive aerial campaign against the British Isles. The Battle of Britain raged in the skies over England throughout the summer and autumn of 1940. Despite the relentless bombing, Britain's Royal Air Force, outnumbered but determined, managed to thwart Hitler's plans for an invasion. This was Hitler's first major setback, a sign that the war would not be the quick and decisive victory he had envisioned. Frustrated by his failure to subdue Britain and eager to fulfill his long-standing goal of conquering the East, Hitler turned his sights on the Soviet Union. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history. The aim was nothing less than the complete annihilation of Soviet power and the subjugation of its people, to make way for the expansion of the Aryan race. It was an invasion driven by both strategic ambition and a deep-seated ideological hatred. The invasion initially went according to plan, with the Wehrmacht advancing deep into Soviet territory. But as the brutal Russian winter set in, the advance stalled. The Battle of Moscow in December 1941 marked another turning point, a symbolic failure that exposed the limits of Nazi power. The The Soviet resistance was fiercer than anticipated, and the cost of Hitler's hubris began to mount. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union would prove to be one of the greatest blunders of the war, setting the stage for a conflict that would drag on for years and consume millions of lives. But for now, the Nazi war machine seemed unstoppable, and Hitler's vision of a new order in Europe appeared within reach. While the world was consumed by the horrors of World War II, a darker, more insidious plan was unfolding within the borders of Nazi-occupied Europe. This was the Holocaust, the systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. It was a genocide unparalleled in history, driven by a twisted ideology that sought to eradicate an entire people. The roots of the Holocaust lay deep within Nazi ideology. From the moment Hitler came to power, anti-Semitism was at the core of his vision for the Third Reich. Jews were scapegoated for Germany's defeat in World War I, blamed for economic hardships, and demonized as an existential threat to the Aryan race. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 had already stripped Jews of their civil rights, but as war consumed Europe, the Nazi regime began to implement the final solution, a plan to systematically exterminate the Jewish population. The violence against Jews escalated dramatically on the night of November 9, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Across Germany and Austria, Nazi paramilitaries and civilians attacked Jewish communities, destroying synagogues, looting businesses, and arresting tens of thousands of Jewish men. Kristallnacht was a turning point, signaling the beginning of a more aggressive phase of persecution that would soon escalate into genocide. With the outbreak of World War II, the Nazi regime expanded its campaign against the Jews. Across occupied Europe, Jewish communities were forcibly relocated into ghettos, overcrowded, walled-off districts where starvation and disease were rampant. From these ghettos, the Nazis began the mass deportations to concentration and extermination camps, industrial complexes designed not for detention, but for systematic murder. The camps were the epicenter of the Holocaust. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and others became the final destination for millions. Upon arrival, prisoners were subjected to a selection process. Those deemed fit for labor were sent to work in inhumane conditions, while the rest, including the elderly, women and children, were sent directly to the gas chambers. The scale of the murder was staggering, with entire communities wiped out in a matter of hours. The Nazis sought to dehumanize their victims at every step. In the camps, prisoners were stripped of their identities, their heads shaved, and their names replaced with numbers tattooed on their arms. Families were torn apart, and the daily existence of the prisoners was reduced to a relentless struggle for survival. Yet, amidst the unimaginable cruelty, there were acts of resistance, small, defiant gestures of humanity in the face of total annihilation. Resistance took many forms. In the ghettos, Jewish underground organizations formed, organizing smuggling operations and even armed uprisings, like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943. Though outnumbered and outgunned, these brave men and women fought back, refusing to go quietly into the night. In the camps, prisoners sabotaged Nazi efforts and documented the atrocities, leaving behind evidence that would one day reveal the true horror of the Holocaust. In 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Nazi-occupied territory, they uncovered the full scale of the Holocaust. The liberation of the camps revealed the depths of the Nazi regime's cruelty. Soldiers who had seen the worst of war were unprepared for the scenes they encountered: piles of bodies, gas chambers still reeking of death, and survivors who were little more than skeletons. The world stood in shock as the true extent of Hitler's final solution became known. After the war, the world sought justice for the crimes of the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials brought Nazi leaders to account for their atrocities, establishing the principles of international law that would guide future generations. But no trial, no punishment could ever fully atone for the horror inflicted on millions of innocent lives. The Holocaust left a scar on humanity, a reminder of the depths to which hatred and intolerance can sink when left unchecked. Today, the Holocaust stands as a stark warning, a lesson from history that must never be forgotten. The memory of those who perished demands that we remain vigilant against the forces of hatred and bigotry wherever they may arise. We remember not only to honor the victims, but to ensure that such evil is never allowed to take root again. By 1945, Adolf Hitler's grand vision of a 1,000-year Reich lay in ruins. What had begun as a seemingly unstoppable march across Europe had turned into a desperate fight for survival. The Nazi regime, once feared and seemingly invincible, was collapsing under the weight of its own hubris and the full might of the Allied forces. The tide of war had begun to turn in 1942, with the German defeat at Stalingrad, a battle that marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. The Eastern Front, once a scene of rapid Nazi advances, became a grinding, brutal war of attrition. The Soviet Union, driven by a resolve to avenge the millions lost to Hitler's aggression, pushed the German forces back, city by city, village by village. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the Allies opened a second front with the D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. The successful landings marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi control. Despite fierce German resistance, the Allied forces broke through the Atlantic Wall, liberating Paris by August 1944 and advancing towards Germany's western borders. The once expansive Reich was now being squeezed from all sides. Desperate to turn the tide, Hitler ordered a final massive offensive in the west, the Battle of the Bulge. Launched in December 1944, this surprise attack through the Ardennes caught the Allies off guard and initially gained ground. But the German advance soon stalled, and the Allies regrouped, inflicting heavy losses on the German forces. The failure of the Battle of the Bulge marked the beginning of the final collapse of the Nazi war machine. By early 1945, Hitler was a shadow of the man who had once commanded Europe with an iron fist. Isolated in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, he refused to accept the reality of Germany's defeat. As Soviet and Allied forces closed in on Berlin, Hitler issued increasingly irrational orders, clinging to the belief that a final victory was still possible. But outside his bunker, the war was drawing to a devastating conclusion. On April 16, 1945, the Soviets launched their final assault on Berlin. The Battle of Berlin was one of the bloodiest and most destructive battles of the war, as Soviet forces fought their way through the streets of the German capital. With the city encircled and supplies dwindling, the Nazi regime crumbled under the pressure. On April 30th, as Soviet troops closed in on the Reich Chancellery, Hitler took his own life in the Führerbunker, choosing death over capture. Hitler's death marked the symbolic end of the Third Reich, but the fighting continued for another week. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies, bringing an end to the war in Europe. The swastika, once a symbol of terror and oppression, was torn down, and the ruins of the Nazi Empire were left to be rebuilt by the survivors of a world forever changed. The fall of the Third Reich revealed the true extent of the horrors committed under Hitler's rule. The liberation of the concentration camps exposed the world to the unimaginable atrocities of the Holocaust. In the months and years that followed, the Allies sought to bring justice to the perpetrators of these crimes through the Nuremberg trials. But the scars left by the war and the genocide would take generations to heal. With the war over, Europe faced the immense task of rebuilding. Germany, once the aggressor, was now a nation in ruins, divided among the victorious Allies. The continent, scarred by years of conflict, began the long and painful process of recovery. But the legacy of the Third Reich would cast a long shadow over Europe, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the post-war world and serving as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and hatred. Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich lasted barely 12 years, but its impact on the world was immeasurable. The fall of the Third Reich brought an end to one of history's most destructive regimes, but the lessons of that dark chapter must never be forgotten. As we remember the millions who perished, we must remain vigilant, guarding against the forces of tyranny and hatred to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. Hitler's actions during World War II left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the course of history in profound ways. The aftermath of his regime set the stage for the Cold War, a prolonged period of tension and division between superpowers. The Cold War emerged as a direct consequence of the ideological conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, both seeking to impose their vision on a fractured Europe. Germany itself was split into East and West, each aligned with opposing blocs, a division that lasted for nearly 45 years. The ethical and moral questions raised by Hitler's regime continue to challenge us. The systematic genocide and war crimes committed under his rule violated fundamental human rights, leading to a global reckoning with the principles of justice and the rule of law. Today we see the resurgence of far-right ideologies that echo the dangerous rhetoric of the past. Understanding and remembering history is crucial to combating these movements and safeguarding our collective well-being. As we reflect on this legacy, it's vital to remain vigilant against tyranny and oppression. The lessons learned from history remind us of the importance of protecting human rights and ensuring that such horrors are never repeated. Let us remember the past not just as a series of events, but as a series of lessons. Vigilance, compassion, and a commitment to justice are our greatest tools in ensuring that the mistakes of history are never repeated. This is our shared responsibility and our enduring challenge. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of history's legacy. May we always remember and honor the lessons learned. If you found this video insightful, make sure to hit subscribe and like buttons and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Join us as we uncover more pivotal moments in history and explore their lasting impacts on our world today. Creating these videos takes a lot of time and research, and your support helps keep the channel going. If you'd like to contribute to the work we do here, consider donating through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Even small donations make a big difference and help me continue bringing you high-quality content without compromise. You can find the links in the description below. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care.